rings on a very lovely Saturday morning at about 7 o'clock. Immediately I got on my bicycle and I rode from Philadelphia across the bridge to Camden. And when I arrived at the pop-up skate park and miniature sort of park that we had been creating for about a week at that point, there was Will waiting for me. Will had only been working with us for a day or two at that point. And in all of our projects, we get people who come out of the woodwork who are incredible leaders and who want to help. So we talked about what was wrong. It had rained the night before, the ramp was starting to bubble a little bit. But it quickly became clear that him wanting me to help him fix the ramp, to open up the tool, was just the smallest little bit. It was just the beginning. He and his friends at that point were actually skating till 1 and 2 in the morning, but they would either at night or they would get up very, very early in the morning to make sure there was not a single piece of trash on this site. There's a little bit more. He and his friends were actually starting to interview people. They were doing design research, as is commonly known in our profession. So as people would come up, and people started coming from all over the region, he would interview them. What do you like about this place? Why did you come here? What could be better? What should we do next? And he wasn't just interviewing people who were coming to skate. As it turns out, he was also interviewing the neighbors. If this had been done in a traditional way, the neighbors wouldn't have wanted a skate park next door, especially with them skating until 2 in the morning. But through his interviews, he was actually able to figure out that they were very happy that he was there, because that vacant lot had been a place, it was a problem in the neighborhood. People would come and drink there, they would urinate there, they would do drugs there, they would leave trash there, and no longer was this happening. The residents were happy to trade their civic leadership, and the cops were actually starting to see that crime was going down, unsurprisingly. And then many months later, I had to interview Will for another project. It was incredible to find out that he had actually, at that point it was starting to get really cold, he had spent 2 months trying to get a meeting with the person who manages this building. And he had been trying to do that because as it was getting cold, there was no place for the kids to play and no place for him to skate. And his building actually has a massive basement that was completely empty, and he saw that space as a possibility. If it's not obvious now, Will was already a natural leader, and he already had visions way beyond what we could have given him for what was possible in his neighborhood. But what was really incredible to learn, he felt like he would not have gone and done all of these things had he not been around people who were different than him, but had similar ideas and aspirations. Being around people like that gave him the confidence that his ideas mattered and that they should be worth fighting for. And then a couple months later, when it was really, really cold, I mean like -20 at night, black, dark, not a very pleasant night, I walk into a community meeting, and I will never forget the moment when some of the people, some of the professional community meeting goers who were in that room at a certain point started to criticize the project and said that the project was doing bad things to kids and it was not for, it was not for teenagers. They stood up and said, no, this is what we want for the neighborhood. This is important to us. You're wrong. We never even saw you out there. But here you have a 17-year-old and a 21-year-old showing up at a community meeting who never had shown up before. None of the people who were involved in the project had been to any community meetings before. And here they're transitioning into being leaders. So for them to have transitioned from never going to a meeting into something and really being an advocate is something huge. And what was really striking, in Camden, there are a lot of vacant lots and empty spaces. When buildings started crumbling, they bulldozed them. So in certain neighborhoods, you will go to a block where there should be 30 houses, and there are 3. People had lots of ideas for these lots. This is Jose. It was great that Jose wanted more playgrounds, and he loved what was happening here. But what was really cool is he had actually done about the same thing himself with his friends about 15 years prior to that. And what was really remarkable is some of them, like Chris, they actually had family members who could build. His dad was a builder. He had tools. He had wood. But what became clear was that they hadn't taken action. One, because they didn't feel like they had permission. And two, because they didn't feel like they had a team that gave them the confidence and support to actually do this. And then one evening, one of the parents who lived in the neighborhood came up to me. He wanted to talk to me because he thinks that his son, or he thought that his son was really lazy, that his son would never put down his cell phone. So while we're having this conversation though, his son Joseph shows up on this rickety, dangerous bicycle. Joseph starts riding his bicycle over these dirt hills, and there are a lot of them. And yet, at a certain point, he starts going over the really big ones and exclaiming, "I am king of the mountain! I am king of the mountain!" That while his father and I were trying to solve something for him, he was already doing it. And he was doing it because he had actually spent the entire day before helping build those mounds of dirt. The fact of the matter is, the world around him was not meaningful enough, or challenging enough, or rich enough, or interesting enough to pry him away from his phone. But when given the opportunity to do something that made a difference, that was risky and challenging and interesting enough for him, there's no phone there. The most important thing to understand is that a majority of the people got involved because they saw something happening. They saw building happening. And for so many of the people involved in this project, planning has never worked for them. They don't get involved, partially because they never hear about stuff, but more importantly because people have lied to them in the past. People have not followed through on promises. Why should they give away their time and their effort and even take the risk of imagining a different future if nothing's ever going to happen? So one of the most basic things that we do in our projects is we make design visible. We move the design studio, the classroom, the community meeting, and the workshop to the sidewalk. From the very beginning of a project, in many cases, we are building. We don't even draw. We draw with wood. We make things at full scale. So when you start with building, when you're building, chemicals are released. You activate what's called the dopamine system. And those chemicals that are released when you're building, when you're hammering, when you're sawing, when you're digging, those chemicals are the fundamental building blocks of a sense of well-being, a sense of connectedness to the people around you, a sense of memory that gives you the strength and willingness to work through the often very hard and painful things it takes to get anything good done. But we also start with building because this is one of the most fundamental ways that we all started off learning about the world. We started off learning about the world first through copying what the people around us are doing. The second most important way we learn about the world was by banging on things, biting things, building things, and knocking them down. All we're tapping into is this most basic way that we often don't use anymore of learning about the world and connecting with other people. So when we're also designing and building in public and we're testing, we're making things real. Everyone makes much better decisions when they're not small, when there's no abstraction. And we try to make everything as real as possible, whether that's making things big or doing everything in the place where it's gonna be so that we can learn as much as possible about that place as fast as possible. So when we actually make that testing visible, when we make our failures visible too, when we make that experimenting visible, it radically changes the conversation. And what happens is we like to actually say that public space is the original internet. When we're there all the time, anyone can come up and contribute an idea. And anyone does. But also great ideas, not just feedback and historical information or data or statistics, but great design ideas, such as the fundamental ones that went into this bench, which is for play, simply came out of designing in public. So what happens is when we make all of that design and action visible, and especially when we let young people lead, or a lot of times women too, people for whom no one really expects them to be able to build or do something like this, people not only feel the need to copy just automatically, but when you get someone like Edwin with a circular saw here, or Tiara making something that's beautiful, that's making a difference, or something really incredible like that, you have a grandmother and a 13-year-old, then that heightens that effect. You get this, well, if they can do it, why can't I? And at a certain point, more and more people start showing up. In some situations, even like this one, there have been either so many people or it's such a distraction that traffic stops. A lot of what we found is that those things that are missing in places, especially smaller things, those are things that often are great for citizens and young people. Even in schools, those things that are missing. We have built a lot of maker spaces, but we haven't been really the ones that built them. We actually use the building of that maker space or that workshop with the students and teachers as a way of building the culture of making and changing that culture of making in a school. Why shouldn't this be science class? Everything about physics and engineering is already built into that. So those things that are missing in a school are tremendous opportunities for strengthening a curriculum, for identifying students and teachers who may not be seen as assets. Some of them may even be failing, that they may be your strongest leaders in the school, and they may have tremendous abilities to get things done. And even in our own work, we have teenagers and engineers making sensors help us know what some of the things that we've made, whether they're actually working or not. And so this bench was designed with kids, it was designed with all sorts of people in this one neighborhood, and it was designed to encourage play. And this one was designed around the verbs to traverse or to balance. So we saw that it was working, but we could never actually get enough photographs of that because it happened so fast to be able to count and prove that it was being used the way we saw it being used. And because no one had ever really made a bench before that could be used for sitting as well as play, no one knew what success was. But even the most basic sensor data helped us understand how it was being used and really make the case for it, that the average person used it for about 3 minutes. We knew what were the peak times of day that it was being used. Some of which kind of surprised us. People were actually using it at 3 in the morning. It turned out that some of the locations we thought were the perfect locations and we thought were being used were not being used as much, and the locations that we thought were really bad locations were actually being heavily used. We just didn't see it. Here we were connecting a very basic need, and that very basic need was one that could actually be met by teenagers or non-experts, but they also would find value in it. These guys learn how to code, they learn how to solder and put together Arduinos, and here's this perfect intersection where you have a need that you can expect much more and get much more. So everywhere I've been in the world, I've seen kids play on bike racks like this. So you can be damn sure when that happens right outside my workshop, I'm going to do something about it. This is a perfect example of not just how we can think about design, but how we can think about those things that are missing, not just in our schools, not just in our neighborhoods, but even at the scale of our sidewalks. How we can expect much more from those missing things. And that those things can equal richer learning, stronger communities, better designs that are more locally appropriate, equity, and all sorts of other great things. So who makes something and where it's made is equally important as what it is and how well it's designed. This is a perfect example because I can teach probably 85% of you how to make this. And you can make this and you can get paid to make this. And there's market value for this, people will buy this, and that equals so much more opportunity for people. This was made entirely in our neighborhood. The money stayed in the neighborhood, and it will stay in the neighborhood for that. We created Tiny WPA to support and grow what we call building heroes. You will notice that they're all ages here. He's 14, she's 65, she's a designer who can't build, she's a teacher who wanted to build and has now started a workshop at her school because of this. And this is like one of the most perfect examples because Every single one of the products they learn how to make, they grew out of one of the Building Heroes' needs. So once a Building Hero can actually make any of these and more products to a very high level of quality, they get paid to make it every time an order comes in. And one of the things I should point out, these are a pain in the butt to make. They're very, very hard on purpose. What we found is that we can get the average person to about 2 millimeters. They see when they've made a mistake, and we are trying to help them have the skills to be able to make very well done things. So growing a group of people who can help other people make things that they think is possible is really, really important. And many of these people are actually getting into the best design schools now in the country. They weren't interested in design or engineering. They're getting in there, they're going there for free. And honestly, they are better builders than most of their professors, definitely better builders than their students, and they are changing their programs because they actually are also trained to help people build.